Transformational Teaching and Learning. We're going to take a look at Kristen Olson's Wounded by School. There's a title that's a bit lengthier, but I didn't want to crowd the screen. So you're seeing part of the title. But the full title is Recapturing the Joy in Learning and Standing Up to Old School Culture. Okay, so some guidelines: mute yourself when you're not speaking. We are recording the webinar. Yes, I hope. If it's not being recorded, can someone please hit record? It'll be available on our website later along with the slides. Use the chat for questions or technical issues like I had. So we have a good team here that's ready and able to troubleshoot.
Catherine, since you're the host, you actually have to hit record, I believe.
Well,
Be on that bottom.
It's recording.
Oh, is it? Sorry about that. Oh, it is recording, I think.
Thank you. A true team effort. A little promo about PFF, our program. We have workshops, webinars, individual appointments. You can earn a college teaching certificate. We're based on the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. So we will help you develop your course design skills, your teaching philosophy, things that you'll need when you enter the teaching space in higher ed. So please feel free to contact us or join our program. And just some other pieces of information, a link to the slides and the recording will be, the links will be emailed and available later on our website. And that's our website there for you, and our email and our services. So we're going to start today with an essential question that will guide our thinking and how we think about not only what Kristen Olson had to say, but how that works for us in the classroom. So how can our classroom practices restore the joy in learning? I know that, very often we are focused on content and we've got to accomplish these things. We've got outcomes. So it's thinking more about what happens in the classroom and how we can engage our students through this enjoyment of learning. And here are some things we're going to do today for this webinar. We're going to talk about those school wounds. So it might be a little uncomfortable. You might not have thought about this before, and that's okay. So we're going to talk about what that looks like for our students, and then our focus will be on how to heal, restore the joy in learning. What can we do in the classroom? So Kristen Olson, she's a writer, educational consultant. Her book is a product of her research when she was a doctoral candidate at Harvard, and she was interviewing students and of all different levels, interviewing people who were accomplished in their fields and people that she knew. And she was hoping to find out and hear, oh, yes, I had these great positive learning experiences and that's what helped me be successful. But what she found out was something very different, and it inspired her to really think more about those moments in education or schooling that take the fun or the joy out of learning and how it affected people individually. And so her discovery was that school wounds are pretty common, and most people experience different types of wounds, different degrees of wounds, but there is hope for healing, and there's a way for us to help our students in the classroom after they've experienced school wounds. So even though her work was primarily in the K through 12 space, I think it's important that we remember that people bring those wounds forward into the higher ed space, and it can affect how they engage with material and what's happening in the classroom. So in her book, she starts off with this learner's Bill of Rights, and I think it's great to be reminded of this. So every learner has the right to know why they're learning something, why it's important now or in the future, a right to engage in questioning or interrogating the idea of importance, the right to be confused and to express this confusion openly, honestly, and without shame. Every learner has the right to multiple paths to understanding a concept, an idea, a set of facts or constructs. Every learner has the right to understand his or her own mind, brain wiring, and intellectual inclinations as completely as possible. The right to interrogate and question the means through which his or her learning is assessed. Every learner has the right to some privacy in their imagination and thoughts, and every learner has the right to take their own imagination and thinking seriously. So these are the rights, Learner's Bill of Rights, as Kirsten Olson sees them. And there are variations elsewhere, but I think, keeping these things in mind and helping students understand that they do have rights when it comes to their education is important. I teach freshman composition, and so they are new to the higher ed space. And when they hear something like this, sometimes they're unfortunately surprised, like, oh, I have rights as a student. Well, okay. And it changes the dynamic. It makes them a little more involved and gives them the feeling that, this is something that they should take on and have responsibility for their own learning. And if they need something from the education system or the classroom or the teacher, they feel a little more comfortable asking when they have it framed as a right. So I thought it would be important for us to consider that as we carried on through this this work, because it can get a little heavy, right? Thinking about school wounds. Kristen Olson also brings up this idea of kintsugi, and in Japanese ceramics, it's this technique of repairing cracks with gold lacquer. And so the ceramic piece now has evidence of breaks and flaws, but that gold lacquer makes it even more beautiful and continues to make it strong and useful and not broken and unworthy of anything else and not useful. So I thought this was a great framing in her book to think about how these wounds or these cracks or flaws can be healed, and how it's not, doesn't mean everything's over, right? There's a way to repair and reconstruct and continue to be a learner. So she begins with this premise that engagement is central to a happy human life, and that when students encounter these practices that wound students, it creates this sense of being reluctant to learning. And by understanding what's happening and why it happens, we can help students restore their joy of learning, help them heal. So thinking about this as we work through some of these ideas about wounds is helpful. It's all in service to restoring joy and hope in the education space. So first, we should understand, what does it mean to be a wounded student? What does it look like? So typically, if we're thinking about wounded students, we hear labels that they're low achiever, they're at risk. There's lots of other labels that are used because in our world of education, we like to track things and do research. And sometimes those labels come out of that process. And when students are labeled in a certain way, sometimes it affects how they are treated in the education system. Some of the behaviors that come up as a result of experiencing some type of wounds, there's bullying, withdrawal, inconsistent attendance, defiance, or rebelliousness. And as a result, right, these students keep the wounds perpetuate, and sometimes they leave school altogether. Sometimes they avoid class and avoid engaging. So it varies, from student to student. And I think it's always good to think about that and not just assume that, hey, this student isn't participating. Maybe they don't like me, they don't like the class, they don't like school. There might be other things going on. Some of the beliefs that result from these wounds, a student might think, well, I'm just not smart. I can't be successful in school. My ideas are not useful or valid. And no matter what I do, it's not going to change because I'm just flawed. I'm not good at school. And honestly, in my class, because it is a general ed writing class, I hear this from a lot of students that believe that they're just not good at school and not good at writing. So because something happened along the way. And also there's feelings of shame. And I do see a lot of this in my students. They feel very embarrassed that they aren't good essay writers. Sometimes there's this sense of learned helplessness. I'm not good anyways, so I'm just not going to try. So their ambition is lowered. They have a hard time being persistent when something is challenging because they have that belief that no matter what they do, it's not going to work. And learning just isn't meaningful or enjoyable or just fun. And, for people that enjoy school and like school, it's always going to be interesting and fun, but there are students who have not had good experiences and it's changed what they think about school. So in the book, she's got 7 categories of wounds. And initially when I was going to do this presentation, I was going to go through each one, and it was tough. It was really tough. So I've tried to just keep the main points without getting too in depth. If you were to read through the book, what's great is that there are stories and anecdotes of students and people who have long since graduated from advanced degrees and so forth, all kinds of people that had stories of what had happened to them and how they overcame those wounds and what they did to continue on with their education and be successful. So, the book isn't all gloom and doom. It's got some great stories of redemption and hope, I guess you can say, and of overcoming challenges or obstacles. So I would encourage you to read the book. It's great. Okay, so here are some things in common when we're thinking about school wounds, right? We're focusing on the ones that are happening in the school environments that are mostly related to differences in cognitive, emotional, or identity, and how people were treated or how they felt they were treated in that school environment. Very often among all the categories, right, there's feelings of disapproval, that they weren't accepted. They feel a little bit, there's some shame because they were different for whatever reason. And because they did not respond well to this pressure to comply, they may have been categorized as difficult or not school material. And what that creates is a sense of alienation from our learner self. And as Olson points out, right, as children, we enjoy learning. It's great fun. It's about curiosity and exploration, but something happens along the way that reduces that pleasure in learning, and then it's not enjoyable. And she also notes that in all her interviews, there wasn't anyone who said, oh, I didn't care about school, I didn't want to do well in school. They all acknowledged that they wanted to do well, but because of what was happening in the environment or how they were treated or labeled, it prevented them from really doing well and being successful. And even though most of what she's focusing on is K through 12, I think there's a lot that still can be said for students in the higher ed space. Some of these wounds carry forward. So we should think about these things when we are working with students. And these are the 7 categories that Olson brings up: wounds of creativity, compliance, rebelliousness, wounds that numb, wounds of underestimation, perfectionism, and wounds of the average. So if we're talking about wounds of creativity, it's related to an environment in which everything is very standardized and it's very teacher-centered transmission. instead of collaboration, and it becomes very habitual, routine. So creativity is reduced, discouraged. Students don't have the confidence to take a risk because they don't want to be wrong. And so the value of education moves from being learning oriented to results oriented. And how that translates is, how do I get an A? What do I need to do to get an A? I want this many points. So it's no longer about exploration and being creativity or using other means to demonstrate skills. It's simply, what are the things that I need to do simply to get the grade? So I personally try to encourage students not to think about their grades, but I know it's so hard. Wounds of compliance and rebelliousness, I paired these together because I think, it's two sides. So wounds of compliance, it's that behavior that the student will just follow the rules. They don't want to think about them, doesn't make sense, don't care, just got to follow. And then rebelliousness is on the other side. Somebody saying, I don't like that rule, I don't want to do that, I don't think that makes sense. And then they are met with these authoritarian, disciplinary kind of structures that label the student as defiant and non-conforming and a problem or a difficult student. If we're thinking about wounds of numbness and creativity, or underestimation, pardon me, numbness, just somebody says, it's just, that's the way it is. And you just follow along and it becomes very rote and very just performative. Like, okay, you want me to do this task? I'll do it. That's it. Underestimation is when students are met with this low expectation, and it's not coming from them, but it's coming from someone else. Like, and we can think of traditional examples like, oh, you're not going to pursue that career anyway, so you don't need to know it. Or, oh, I know it's really hard, so it's okay, you don't have to really do it. And when that happens, the student says, well, I guess I'm not very good at this, so I'm not going to keep trying. And then it self-perpetuates for the student. And I will be the first one to tell you, yep, I had that with math. It's like, okay, I know you're not getting it. Just take a C. It's like, oh, yeah. Wounds of perfectionism and wounds of the average. So perfectionism, I think this one is the most pernicious, speaking personally, because it almost feels like, oh, this, you should aim for doing something really well. But the problem becomes when a student fixates on the high grades and teacher approval, and it's no more about, hey, let me give this a great effort, I'm proud of what I did. It's simply, I want that grade and I want that teacher to approve what I've done. And then wounds of the average occur when that student feels stuck in the middle. So they're not experiencing those highs or lows of achievement, I guess you could say, and they see themselves as kind of fixed and not able to hit those high marks, and not knowing why. And so they feel just stuck in the middle, that they're just average and they just kind of go along. So for a lot of these categories, there is overlap, and I think you can kind of tell that, one can lead into the other. But overall, they are commonly experienced by lots of different students at different times. Okay, so now, how do we do this, right? Recapturing the joy in learning. So what can we do in the classroom? How can our practices in the classroom support this to get students to enjoy learning once again? So some things to think about, some types of learning that really create an environment that leads to this joy of learning. So moments where students can be autonomous. It's very, self-sustaining, leads to self-efficacy when students can feel like, yes, it's an individual task. I did it myself. I really worked on this and did well. But social reward, the external motivators are still very important. So And it also leads to accountability. So this idea that there's social feedback, someone recognizes that you've done well or that you did a great job, is still important. And also this tension and release. So it's okay to have that difficult job because it feels good when you've met that challenge and you have finished that task. So if we can incorporate all three types of learning in our classrooms, it offers students a more well-rounded view of themselves and of learning, right? There's autonomy where you can do things for yourself. There is social reward, group work, collaboration, feedback about your work, and then also the pleasure of a job well done. So first, it's important that we build awareness for ourselves and for our students. So thinking about schooling versus education. What's the difference? Is there a difference? Where does learning fit in? What works for me with my students is being very transparent and using systems thinking and helping them understand why they're engaging in the tasks that I've set up for them or the group work. When they can see how it fits with the bigger system of what we're doing in the classroom and a bigger system beyond them, whether it's in service to their degree or what they might be doing in the future, in their jobs or applying for scholarships or internships. I always ask them to think about how else they can use writing. So helping them think about education as a system instead of class by class by class helps make a little more meaning for them, like, oh, okay, now I see what's going on. Even if you're being transparent about the difficulties in education, if we can recognize that and acknowledge that, I find it's very helpful to the students. Helping students reflect and examine their own motivations, the purpose, why they're doing what they're doing, what are their experiences, when have they been successful or less successful. I try not to use the word failure in class. So I'll say, when were you successful? When were you not as successful? What did you do in that situation? And helping them learn how to reframe any of those negative experiences in a positive light. For me, sharing my own failures is helpful when they hear that the teacher is not perfect. I think that goes a long way. So in a related way, self-worth, fostering self-worth. How can we do that in the classroom? Written, verbal encouragement and feedback for the students, additive language, and also giving them encouragement that's just really not related to coursework. I think that is helpful. So finding those times where you can talk about other things people do in their lives, something simple. First few minutes of class, I'll say, hey, does anyone have something to promote? And that's when I hear things like, yeah, I'm in a band and, we're performing on this day, or we're having a fundraiser for this, or I'm going to be at this dance recital. So I think it's great to just give students that space of a few minutes to remind them that there are other things going on besides just this course. And, avoid labeling and categorizing students, even if we don't do it outrightly. If we're doing it in our heads, I think that can also affect how we engage with students. Nell Noddings is awesome. She has a lot of work about creating communities of caring. So her pedagogy of care and ethics in caring is wonderful to think about in terms of helping students with their own self-worth. When they feel that the teacher is watching or the teacher cares, they behave differently. And it's one thing I know that has really helped with my students is when they say, wow, you really do care. And I'm like, yeah. So it tells me that they have not always experienced that type of a community in the classroom. So I'm a strong supporter of that. And then thinking about how you can decrease or reframe policies and policy language. And that's a tough one because we do want our attendance policies or, our late policy. And it's sort of embedded into the system of schooling. So if we can think about other ways to communicate these guidelines, it's helpful and the students feel less at odds with the classroom. And trusting and empowering students is also important. So thinking about those non-competitive learning environments or tasks. So coming up with things that are process-oriented. Thinking of the student as the author of instruction by giving them choices in assignments or activities, and that's related to UDL, as well as using multiple modalities, and that will work to engage students. And also encourage learning from mistakes. So asking them to revise, asking them to reflect on how they would revise something, or helping them figure out where they need to improve on their own and help instead of waiting for the teacher to say, okay, you need to work on these things, helping them understand how they can do that for themselves, and adopting that no failure attitude. And just, I know it will vary from discipline to discipline, but see if you can find ways to help them work and revise or work and, recover if they've lost, a little bit of a grade here or there, or if something has not worked out, trying to figure out ways to help them rebuild that rather than just leaving them to sit with a failure. And integrating exploration and meaningfulness, encouraging curiosity or risk-taking, experiential learning models, so hands-on, and then honoring prior or personal knowledge. When students can bring in what they know from previous classes or from their own experiences or observations, makes it more meaningful to them when they can connect it. So I always try to keep my class and my content very connected to things outside of the classroom so that it's not viewed as, okay, I only just do this for class. I only do this thinking just for this class on Mondays and Wednesdays from 12 to 2. So I think if we can encourage them to bring in their personal or prior knowledge, they become more connected and it's more meaningful to them. And then finally, it's thinking about modifications or additions versus fundamental redesign. So if you already have your course designed, it's thinking about how you can modify a bit, add something that's a creative project, or give them an option to address a project in a different way. And that leads to equity and inclusivity. And it's interesting to think about redesigning with that in mind, and that it's a matter of like opening your boundaries and opening the parameters of an assignment. So it's not that and this is just my observation, what I thought was interesting. I'm like, I can just like let go of that limiter and then everyone can participate in the way that works for them. And it was interesting to me to see how that works. It wasn't more work. And sometimes people think, oh, it's more work. I have to do this other thing and this extra thing. And it isn't always that way. It's sometimes taking away things from your parameters or limits for an assignment and letting students engage in a way that makes sense. And the quality of work is often, well, I would say better, just to use that throwaway term. But it becomes clear that they're more interested and more engaged. And this, I think, is important when we're restoring hope, is thinking about when goals are not yet achieved, and not thinking of, okay, you didn't make that goal. Oh, well, that's it, done, right? It's like, all right, keep that goal, but just keep going. And that helps students build resiliency. And even hearing from the instructor, like, yeah, you didn't quite get it that time, but keep going, you'll get it. You can do it. And I think students need to hear that. And they need to hear that it's possible. And, just in my own experience, when I told that to students, it signals to them that I trust them, that they can do it, and they will. So those are my final thoughts in terms of thinking about school wounds and what to do about them and how to deal with them in the classroom, and how we can think about our course design and how we engage with students when they are entering the higher ed space with those scars or wounds from things they've experienced in the past. And I would encourage all of you to read Kirsten Olson's book. It was from 2009, but I think there's a lot in there that is still applicable today. So now I wanted to just open it up if anyone wants to reflect or share. We can take a few minutes. I'm trying to be a little mindful of the time because I know we started late and it's 1:45. And if you're not comfortable sharing, that's okay too. But I wanted to just leave a little space for any additional thoughts or ideas that you might have. And in the meantime, let me offer to you while you're thinking. We've got some upcoming webinars, right, about assessing student learning and alternatives to letter grading on Tuesday, March 2nd. I will have another webinar, and hopefully we will not have technical difficulties on that day, Thursday, March 11th, using productive struggle in the classroom. What does it mean? What does it look like? How to be a warm demander. So, yes, you can be caring and empathetic, but still maintain your content standards and getting students to those outcomes. Here are some resources, but we'd love to hear from you. Here's the book, and all this will be on the slides later. You can access the Snell Noddings. That's why I referred to Pedagogy of Care. UDL guidelines. So if you're interested in reading more about it and how to optimize your classroom, there's a website there. ACSD has a lot of great information on all different types of education issues. But I liked this one particular article dealing with the idea of systems thinking. EDUCAUSE, great if you need more information about diversity, inclusion, and equity. And the Learning Policy Institute also has some great information about the world of education. You can always make an appointment to see us. Here's our LinkedIn, if you'd like to join us on LinkedIn. And I think I see questions in the chat. Here are our social platforms. We're on, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. That's it. And now I'm going to stop sharing if you don't mind. And then let's see what's happening in the chat.
Had a really good comment connecting to Bettina Love's book, We Want to Thrive, Not Just Survive.
Right, absolutely. And, I think, the nature of education is changing, and it is, the doors are opening to all different types of learners and different types of students for different goals. And the more we can support that and the more we can think about our practices and what we're doing in the classroom, the better it will be for all of our students. Trying to look. Yes, so Lee, you make a good point too, that sometimes learners are shamed when they reveal they don't understand something or if they're struggling, and then they don't want to ask a question. And I find this as well, and I do tell them you have the right to not know something. That's why this is education. You're here to learn. And I also like to put them in groups and give them that kind of a question. Talk to your group members about something that you're curious about or something that was a struggle for you. And Often they'll share with classmates before they share with the teacher or the larger, or participate in a larger discussion about what they need help with. But then there's some students that have flat out told me, Miss Connor, what? That's not clear. I don't understand that. And then I'll look around and there'll be other students like, mm-hmm. So I think it's great when students feel comfortable asking those questions in class. Trying to take a look here. And thank you everyone for attending. So if you have more questions, I will be here for a few minutes. If you have suggestions for us, I'd love to hear them. And if not, thank you again for attending. Have a wonderful weekend, and I hope you all are well.